I stood at my husband's grave in the rain and felt nothing. No grief, no tears. 3 years of marriage and I felt absolutely nothing. And then I looked down at the coffin and I saw it, the ring, his ring. The one I watched him bury in the garden the night he thought I was asleep. The night everything changed. That ring was not supposed to be in that coffin, which meant one thing. My husband was not in it either. Chapter 1, the wrong grief. The funeral director told her to wear black. She already was. Not because anyone told her to, because Vera Solano had worn black for 3 years. Since the morning she woke up married to a man she didn't know and decided, quietly, privately, with the particular coldness of a woman who has survived worse, that she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her grieve the life she'd lost. She grieved it in black instead. So when Marcus Solano died on a Tuesday car accident, black ice, a road outside the city that she'd never heard him mention, she was already dressed for it. The church is full of people she doesn't recognize. That's the first wrong thing. Not surprising, their entire marriage had been full of people she didn't recognize. Names she wasn't given, phone calls he took in other rooms with the door closed, and his voice dropped to something she couldn't read from the hallway, but the church is full. 200 people minimum. Men in expensive suits with the specific posture of people who are always watching exits. Women who look at her with expressions she can't decode, not pity exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looks almost like relief. She shakes hands, accepts condolences, says thank you for coming 37 times because she counts to keep herself present. She doesn't cry. People notice. She sees them noticing and doesn't care. The priest says things about Marcus that don't sound like Marcus. Generous, devoted, a man of deep conviction. She stands in the front pew with her hands folded and her face composed and thinks, I lived with him for 3 years and I could not tell you his favorite color. She couldn't tell you anything real about him. That was the marriage. She met Marcus Solano at a gallery opening on a Thursday night in October. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at dinner with her sister, but Alina had canceled at the last minute. Something came up. I'm sorry. I'll explain later. And Vera had been already dressed and already out the door, and she decided to go anyway because she was 28 years old, and she was not going to spend another Thursday night in her apartment pretending she was fine with the smallness of her life. The gallery was the kind of place that sold art for the price of cars. She didn't belong there. She knew it and didn't care. Another thing about Vera, she had never particularly needed to belong anywhere. She moved through spaces that weren't hers with the ease of someone who'd learned early that confidence was mostly performance, and she was a very good performer. Marcus found her in front of a painting she didn't like. You hate it, he said. Not a question. She turned. He was tall, dark-suited, with a face that was handsome in the severe way of things that weren't built for softness. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that were direct in a way she wasn't used to. Most men looked at her like they were deciding something. He looked at her like he'd already decided and moved on. I think it's trying too hard, she said. Everything in this room is trying too hard, including you. Something shifted in his face. Fast. Gone before she could name it. Especially me, he said. She should have paid more attention to that answer. They talked for 2 hours. He was different. Quiet in a way that wasn't awkward, just contained, like a man who had learned to take up exactly the space he needed and not 1 inch more. He asked her questions and listened to the full answer before responding, which sounds like a small thing and isn't. He didn't perform interest. He was just interested. She went home thinking about him. He called the next day. 6 months later, they were married. Looking back, she would find it difficult to explain how it happened so fast. Not because she'd been swept away, she was never the swept away type, but because Marcus had been careful, deliberate. He built something between them brick by brick, conversation by conversation, and by the time she looked up, she was already inside it. The proposal was quiet, no performance. Just the two of them in her kitchen on a Sunday morning and him looking at her across the table and saying, I want you to be my wife. Not will you marry me? Not a question, a statement. Like he'd thought about it and made a decision and was telling her as a courtesy. She said yes. She doesn't entirely know why. The wedding was small. City Hall. Her sister as witness, one man on his side she'd never seen before and never saw again. Afterward, dinner at a restaurant he chose, quiet and expensive, and he held her hand across the table and looked at her like she was something he was finally sure of. She thought she understood him then. She didn't understand anything. The marriage was cold. That's the only word for it, not cruel. Never cruel. Marcus was not a man who raised his voice or broke things or came home with rage looking for somewhere to land. He was precise and controlled and always somewhere else, even when he was standing right in front of her. He traveled constantly, sometimes 3 weeks out of 4. He called when he was away, every night, without fail, at 9 p.m. And the calls were short and careful, and she learned to read the specific quality of his silences the way you learn to read weather. He never told her where he went. She stopped asking after the first year. What he gave her, a house that was too large for 2 people, financial security that felt more like a transaction than a gift. Occasional evenings where he was present, really present, and those evenings were the most confusing part of everything, because on those evenings he was warm and dry and she would catch herself thinking there. That's who he actually is, and then he'd be gone again, physically or otherwise, and she'd be left with the warmth of it cooling in her hands. She didn't love him. She told herself she didn't love him. The ring is what breaks her. She's been standing at the graveside for 20 minutes in the rain, holding herself together with the particular rigid composure she's perfected over 3 years, when she looks down at the coffin and sees it on top of the dark wood. Placed there by the funeral home, presumably a final detail, a personal touch. His wedding ring, gold, simple band. The one he wore every day without fail, she'd noticed because it was one of the few consistent things about him. The ring always there, always exactly right on his left hand. She stares at it. Her mind goes very quiet, because she knows something about that ring that no one else at this funeral knows. She knows it because she saw it with her own eyes on a night 8 months ago when she couldn't sleep and went to the garden at 2 a.m. and stood in the dark and watched her husband dig a small hole near the oak tree at the back wall and place something inside it and cover it over carefully. She'd watch from the bedroom window. He never knew. She went out the next morning when he was gone and dug it up. The ring. His wedding ring. Buried in a box with 3 words scratched on the inside of the lid in his handwriting. Not yet. Wait, she put it back. Covered it over, never mentioned it, and now it was on top of his coffin, which meant someone had dug it up, which meant someone knew it was there, which meant this funeral had been arranged by someone who knew things they should not know, or by Marcus himself. The rain comes down. Vera stands very still. My husband is not in that coffin. The thought arrives fully formed, certain, with the specific weight of true things. She doesn't react. She has spent 3 years learning not to react. She looks at the ring for 3 more seconds, looks away, accepts another condolence from a man whose name she doesn't catch, and spends the rest of the graveside service doing what she's always done. Watching. Waiting. Building a case. Chapter 2. What she finds. She goes back to the garden that night. Alone. After the reception, 2 hours of catered grief in her too large house. People she didn't know eating food she didn't order, saying things about a man they clearly knew better than she did. She moved through it with her composure intact and her eyes recording everything. The garden is dark. She doesn't bring a light. She knows where the tree is. She digs with her hands. The box is gone. Not the hole is there, recently disturbed, the earth still loose. But the box is gone. Someone came back for it. Recently. Before the funeral or after, she can't be sure. She sits back on her heels in the wet grass and looks at the hole and thinks, Marcus staged his death. He planned it carefully enough that there's a body somewhere, a death certificate, 200 people at a funeral. Carefully enough that the ring was placed on the coffin as a message. To her. Specifically to her, because no one else knew about the box, which means he knew she'd seen him that night, which means he had known for 8 months that she knew. Not yet. Wait, that's what the box said. He buried it. She found it. He knew she found it and he said, not yet. Wait, so the funeral is a message. Wait, he said. 8 months ago in a garden in the dark, she's done waiting. She finds the first thing in his study. She's been in his study before, of course she has. It's her house too, but she's never searched it. She respected the boundary of it, his closed door, his private space, in the way she'd respected every other wall he built. She told herself it was dignity. Standing in the doorway now, she thinks it might have been fear. Fear of finding something that would require her to act. She's not afraid of that anymore. The desk is clean. Deliberately clean, the kind of clean that isn't absence but removal. She checks the drawers. Standard contents, nothing interesting. She checks the false bottom she finds in the bottom left drawer. She finds it because she has good instincts, and because the drawer is 2 inches shallower than it should be. Inside, a phone. Old model, prepaid, 1 contact saved. No name, just a number, 1 message thread, sent messages only. The last one sent 3 days before the accident. It's time. She's ready even if she doesn't know it yet. She reads it twice. She puts the phone in her pocket. She keeps looking. The second thing is in the bedroom. Behind the painting she never liked, the one he chose, the one she asked him about once, and he said I needed it here without explaining why. A safe. Small. Combination lock. She tries their wedding date. Wrong, she tries her birthday. Wrong, she tries the date they met. It opens inside. A passport. Not his name. Not his face, or not the face she knew, but looking at it, really looking, she can see the architecture of him beneath it. Different hair, different age listed, but the eyes are his. The name reads Alexei Morozov. She sits on the edge of the bed with the passport in her hands and looks at the face of the man she married and thinks, I don't know you at all. And underneath that, quieter, more honest, I knew that. I always knew that. She doesn't sleep. She sits in the kitchen with the phone and the passport and a glass of wine she doesn't drink and builds a timeline in her head the way she's always built things, methodically, without panic, piece by piece. Marcus Solano doesn't exist. Or rather, he exists on paper, was constructed carefully, has a history she probably couldn't find holes in even if she tried. But Alexei Morozov exists too, has a passport, which means a government somewhere issued it, which means he has a real identity underneath the one she married. The marriage was constructed. She was what? A cover, a convenience, a target. She thinks about 3 years of his careful attention. The gallery, the questions, the way he listened. She thinks about the evenings he was present and warm and real, and she stops. She picks up the prepaid phone. She's ready even if she doesn't know it yet. He said that 3 days before he died. 3 days before he faked dying. She's ready. She is she. She is the subject of his last message. He sent it to someone and then he disappeared and left her a ring on a coffin and a box that said wait and a safe that opened with the date they met. He left her breadcrumbs. He wanted her to find these things. The question is why. She calls the number at 3 a.m. It rings 4 times. She expects voicemail. She gets silence, the specific silence of a call that's been answered by someone who isn't speaking first. I found the phone, she says, and the passport, and I know the ring was a message. She pauses. So whoever you are, tell him I'm done waiting. The silence on the other end shifts. She can't explain how she knows, she just does. The quality of it changes. Like the person listening has stopped breathing. Then the call ends. She puts the phone down. Her heart is doing something she doesn't give permission to. She goes to bed. She doesn't sleep. Chapter 3. The Man in the Rain comes 3 days later. She's been expecting something, not him specifically, not this, but something. She's been sleeping lightly and watching the street from the upstairs window and carrying the small knife she bought the day after the funeral in the pocket of every coat she owns. She's not afraid. She wants to be clear about that. She is not afraid. She is prepared, which is different. He knocks. That surprises her. Whatever she expected, a shadow at the window, a car parked across the street, something anonymous and indirect. She didn't expect a knock at the front door at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday like a normal person. She looks through the glass. He's tall, dark coat. Standing back from the door slightly, hands visible, deliberately visible, she realizes, like he knows she'll be checking. His face is, she doesn't have a word for it immediately. It's the face from the passport mostly, but alive and therefore completely different. He looks like a man who has been outside in the cold for longer than was comfortable and has not let it show. He looks like Marcus. He doesn't look like Marcus at all. She opens the door. He looks at her the way he always looked at her, with that direct, complete attention that had nothing performed in it, and says, Vera, one word, her name. In a voice that is Marcus's voice and also somehow more than Marcus's voice. Like she'd been hearing a translation for 3 years and this was the original. She doesn't move. Doesn't step back. Come in, she says. You have a lot to explain. He comes in. He stands in her kitchen, their kitchen, like a man who knows every inch of it and has missed it and is not going to let himself show that. She puts the kettle on because she needs something to do with her hands. "Your name isn't Marcus," she says. "No, Alexei." A pause, among other things. What does that mean? He pulls out a chair, sits, puts his hands flat on the table. She recognizes the gesture. He always did that when he was about to say something he'd been deciding how to say. "It means I've had several names," he says. Marcus Solano was the most recent. "The most permanent, she says. "You faked your own death, yes, and the marriage." Something moves across his face, fast. "The marriage was real. You lied to me every day for 3 years, yes." "That's not real." He looks at her steadily. "Everything I felt was real, everything He stops. Jaw tightening. "The name was false. The history was false. The feeling was not." The kettle boils. She makes tea she doesn't want and puts a cup in front of him because 3 years of marriage means muscle memory runs deep even when everything else is destroyed. "Start from the beginning," she says. "The actual beginning." He talks for 2 hours. His real name is Alexei Morozov. He was an operative. She doesn't get the full shape of it immediately, just pieces. A government or something adjacent to a government, the kind of organization that doesn't have a public name. He'd been doing this for 11 years, building identities, living them, leaving them. Marcus Solano was supposed to be another one. A 12-month cover, 18 at most. He was in the city for a job. She doesn't get the details of the job yet. He isn't ready to give them, and she knows better than to push, and he needed an anchor. A life that looked real. A reason to be here, and then you found me, she says. "And then I found you at the gallery. I knew you'd be there," he says. "Your sister canceling wasn't accidental." She stares at him. "Alina," she says slowly, "doesn't work for anyone," he says quickly. "She was just asked a favor. By someone she trusted. She didn't know what it was for. She set me up. She introduced you to a man she was told was a good person who needed to meet someone real." He holds her gaze. "That part wasn't entirely a lie." She stands up, walks to the window, looks at the garden, the oak tree, the patch of disturbed earth still visible in the dark. "You were supposed to use me as a cover," she says. "For 12 months, yes, and instead you married me, yes." Why? The silence behind her is very long, because 12 months wasn't enough, he says quietly. And then 18 wasn't. And then I had a choice: walk away and close the operation, or lie to me for 3 more years, or stay. She turns. He's looking at her with the most unguarded expression she's ever seen on his face. And she has studied his face for 3 years, cataloged every micro-expression, built a whole private science of reading him. This is new. This is him without the architecture of Marcus Solano holding anything in place. He looks devastated. Careful and devastated, like a man holding something fragile he has no right to be holding. "You stayed," she says. "And then you faked your death. I had to. Why?" "Because the people I work for found out the operation had extended beyond its parameters," he says. "Because someone told them Marcus Solano had become a problem. That I'd gotten too close to my cover. That I was compromised. Were you?" He looks at her. "Yes," he says. Simply. Certainly. Completely. She doesn't ask him to leave. She doesn't know what that means yet about her, about this, about what happens next. She knows she should be angrier than she is. She knows that the rational response to everything he's just told her is to pick up a phone and call someone and report. What? She doesn't even know who he works for. She doesn't know who to report him to. Or maybe that's an excuse. Maybe she doesn't call anyone because she is sitting across from the man she spent 3 years trying not to love, and he is looking at her like she is the only real thing he has ever touched, and she is. She is not made of stone. She never was. She just learned to look like it. "Where have you been?" she says. "Since the funeral." "Close." "How close?" He reaches into his coat, produces a photograph, slides it across the table. She picks it up. It's her. Taken from a distance, a long lens, professional. She's walking out of a coffee shop 2 blocks from the house. Date stamp in the corner. "Yesterday, you've been watching me," she says. "I needed to know you were safe." "That's not your decision to make." "No," he says. "It isn't." She puts the photograph down, looks at it. Looks at herself, small, unknowing, crossing a street with coffee in her hand, and feels something complex move through her. Not quite violation, not quite comfort. Something in between that she doesn't have a clean name for. "What do you want?" she says, coming here, knocking on the door. "What do you actually want from me?" He's quiet for a long moment. "Nothing," he says. "I don't want anything from you. I came because..." He stops, tries again. "I came because you called, and because I needed you to know the truth." All of it, even the parts that make you hate me. I don't hate you, she says it before she decides to. It sits in the air between them, honest and inconvenient. You should, he says quietly. Probably, she agrees. Neither of them moves. Outside, the rain starts again, the same rain as the funeral, she thinks, like the weather hasn't moved on either. You can stay tonight, she says. The guest room. And tomorrow you tell me everything else. The parts you held back. He looks at her for a long moment. There's more, she says. Not a question, there's more, he confirms. I know. She stands. I always knew when you were holding something back. She pauses. I chose not to push. I don't know why. I do, he says. She looks at him. Because you were afraid, he says, very quietly. Not of what I was hiding, of what you'd have to do once you knew. She stands in the kitchen doorway for a moment. This man who is and isn't her husband. This stranger who is and isn't the person she knows better than anyone. Good night, Alexei, she says. Something in his face, at his name, his real name, in her voice, breaks slightly and reforms. Good night, Vera, he says. Chapter 4. What he was hiding, the something else, takes 3 days to come out fully. Not because he's being evasive. She can tell the difference between evasion and a man who is trying to find the right architecture for something that doesn't have clean lines. He's been sleeping in the guest room. He's been here, present, in the house in a way Marcus never quite was, eating breakfast at the kitchen table, existing in rooms without disappearing from them, answering her questions with the directness she always sensed, was the real him underneath the careful performance of her husband. She finds she prefers him. The real version, even now, even knowing everything, that bothers her more than she lets on. On the third morning, she comes downstairs to find him already awake, of course. He barely sleeps. She's always known that about him, with 2 cups of coffee made and a folder on the table that he's been waiting to show her. She sits down, pulls the folder toward her, opens it. The first page is her sister's name. She looks up. Alina wasn't just asked a favor, he says. His voice is even. Careful, she was being watched by the same people I work for before I came here. They identified her as a connection point to you, to me, Vera says slowly. Why me? Because of your father. The room goes very still. Her father has been dead for 12 years. Car accident, a real one, she's always believed, a wet road and bad luck. She was 20, just starting university. It broke something in her that she'd rebuilt carefully and never talked about. What about my father? He wasn't who you thought he was. She closes the folder, opens it again, closes it. Talk, she says. Her father, Victor Sorrell, an architect, a quiet man who loved jazz and made terrible coffee and called her Mishka, Little Mouse, until the day he died, was not an architect, or he was. But he was also something else, something adjacent to what Alexei is or was. A man who lived in the space between governments, who traded in information the way other men traded in commodities, who had built a career in the shadows so complete that the life her family lived, the apartment, the holidays, the jazz records, was constructed on top of it like a house built on water. He'd been careful, more careful than most. He'd kept them completely separate, his real work, his real life, the family who knew nothing. But he had one thing. One asset so significant that when he died, the people he worked for spent 12 years looking for it. Something he'd taken when he left. Something they wanted back. They never found it because he gave it to his daughter. He just didn't tell her what it was, Vera says. Her voice is very level. He gave it to me, in a manner of speaking. What does that mean? Alexei turns to a page in the folder. A photograph. Her father, younger, standing with 2 men she doesn't recognize. And in his hand, a small object. A drive, she thinks. Or something that looks like one. There's information, Alexei says, encoded. Hidden in something your father gave you before he died. We don't know what, a gift, a document, something physical. We only know it exists and he hid it in plain sight. He pauses. With you, she thinks about what her father gave her in the last year of his life. His watch, a box of letters, his record collection. A ring, her grandmother's, he said, old gold with a small engraving inside she'd never been able to fully read. She looks at Alexei. And you were sent here to find it. Yes, that was the job. That was always the job, yes, and the marriage was supposed to give me access to your life. Your home, long enough to find it without. He stops. Without what? Without you knowing. She stands up, walks to the window. stands there with her back to him and her hands flat on the counter, and breathes with the deliberate evenness of a woman who has learned to keep herself intact when everything around her is falling apart. "You were going to take it," she says, "whatever it is, and leave. That was the plan. Before 12 months became 3 years, yes. And now," he says, and his voice has shifted into something she's never heard from him, rough at the edges, uncontrolled, real in a way that Marcus Solano never quite managed. "Now I'm sitting in your kitchen telling you everything because I cannot." He stops. "I will not take anything from you again. Not without your knowledge. Not without your choice." She turns. He's looking at her with that devastated, careful expression. His hands are flat on the table, the gesture she knows, except his knuckles are white. "What do they want it for?" she says. "It contains the identities of 11 people currently embedded in, it doesn't matter where. If it surfaces, those people are exposed. Some of them will be killed, and your organization wants to protect them, or wants to use the information themselves." His jaw tightens. "I'm no longer entirely certain which, but you were. I was certain of a lot of things 3 years ago." She looks at him for a long time. "The ring," she says suddenly. "My grandmother's ring." Something in his face, recognition. "Confirmation, you knew," she says. "I suspected. For about a year, and you didn't take it, no." Why? He holds her gaze. "Because it was yours," he says, simply. Like it's the most obvious thing in the world. "Because he gave it to you. Because taking it felt," he looks at his hands, "it felt like the thing I was sent here to do, and I had stopped being able to do the things I was sent here to do." She crosses the kitchen. She stops in front of him. She reaches up and takes the chain from under her shirt. She's worn it every day for 12 years. The ring on a chain because it's too large for her fingers, and holds it between them. The gold catches the light. The engraving inside, small, worn, a sequence of characters she always thought was decorative. "Then let's find out what he gave me," she says. Chapter 5. The thing between them, they work. She's good at it, methodical, precise, building understanding piece by piece. He's good at it differently, instinctive, fast, the kind of mind that processes patterns without numbing them. Together there, she notices this and files it, better than either of them alone. She tries not to think about what that means. The ring takes 2 days to decode. The engraving isn't decorative, it's a key. And the key unlocks a file that lives in an account her father set up in her name in a bank she's had since she was 21 and always assumed was just savings. It's not savings. "Papa," she says quietly when they find it. Just that. Just the word in the dark of the study with the screen open in front of her. Alexei doesn't say anything. He puts his hand over hers on the desk, just for a moment, brief and warm, and then takes it away. She swallows. "We need to talk about what we do with this," she says. "Yes, your organization is not as clean as I believed." "How not clean?" He's quiet for a moment. "The men in the photograph with your father," he says. "2 of them. I recognized them 6 months into being here." His voice is very controlled. "They're the men who ordered his car accident." She processes that. Her father wasn't an accident. Her father was handled. She sits with that for a long time in the dark of the study, and Alexei sits with her and doesn't try to fill the silence or manage her reaction, and she is, despite everything, grateful for that. For being allowed to hold something terrible without someone trying to take it from her. "They killed him for the information," she says. "Yes. And when they couldn't find it, they sent you." "Yes. And now you're telling me this." She looks at him. "Which means you've burned everything. Your cover, your organization, whatever protection you had, yes." Why? He looks at her. In the dim light of the study, with the screen glow on his face and 12 years of her dead father's secrets between them, he looks like a man who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has finally put it down. "Because you deserve to know who killed your father," he says. "And because I am," he stops. "I am done being the instrument of people who do things like that. And me," she says quietly. "What am I?" He's quiet for a long moment. "You are the only real thing that has happened to me in 11 years, he says. "That's what you are." The study is very quiet. She thinks about 3 years of cold mornings and his 9 p.m. calls, and the evenings he was present and warm and there. The evenings she'd fold away and take out in the dark after he left again. She thinks about how she'd told herself she didn't love him, how firmly she'd believed it. "I knew," she says. "I always knew something was wrong. You chose the warmth over the questions." "Yes." She looks at her hand. "That's not like me." "I know," he says. "That's how I knew what, that it was real." His voice is very quiet. You're not a woman who chooses warmth over answers. You never have been, so when you did, he stops. I knew what it meant. She looks at him. This is the moment. She can feel it, the specific gravity of a before and after, the kind of moment you recognize while it's happening and rarely do. She could be smart. Walk away. Build the case against him the way she builds everything, methodically, brick by brick, with her composure intact and her heart protected. She's been smart her whole life. Tell me one true thing, she says. The most true thing you know. He looks at her for a long moment. I would burn every name in that file before I let anyone use it to hurt you, he says. Without hesitation, without looking back. He holds her gaze. That's the most true thing I know. She kisses him. Not softly. She was never going to do it softly. She kisses him like a woman reclaiming something that was always hers even when she pretended it wasn't. And he kisses her back like a man who has been holding himself back from exactly this for 3 years and has finally, completely, run out of reasons. When they break apart, they're both breathing differently. His forehead drops to hers. His hands are in her hair, both of them careful and certain, and she can feel his heart under her palms. Faster than usual, faster than the controlled, steady pulse she's always measured him by. Vera, he says, just her name. But the way he says it, her real name in his real voice, lands in the center of her chest like something she's been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. Don't disappear again, she says. Never, he says. Not from you. Chapter 6. Burn it down. The men come on a Friday. She's been expecting them. Alexei warned her 3 days ago that the window was closing, that whoever he worked for would eventually triangulate his location, and that when they did, they would come not to negotiate but to handle. She knows what handle means now. She's not afraid. She keeps saying that, and it keeps being true, and she thinks maybe that's what grief does when you get to the other side of it. Not that it makes you fearless, but that it makes you clear. She's clear about what she wants to protect, about what she's willing to do. She and Alexei have spent 3 days preparing. They come at 2 a.m. 4 men. Professional, she can see it in how they move, how they clear the space, how they communicate without speaking. They are very good at this. What they don't know, so is she. Or she's becoming it, what they also don't know. The information in the file has already been copied 3 times and sent to 3 separate locations with 3 separate instructions about when to release it. Mutually assured destruction, Alexei said when they set it up. The only leverage that actually works. She'd looked at him. You learned that from your organization. I learned it from watching what happens when you don't have it. The standoff is tense is the wrong word. Tense implies uncertainty. This is something colder. The 4 men in her living room with their weapons and their instructions, and the man she's been married to for 3 years standing between her and them with nothing but his stillness and the particular authority of someone who knows something you don't. The man in charge, older, gray at the temples, the face of someone who's been doing this long enough to stop feeling it, looks at Alex with the specific expression of someone who was close to someone once and isn't anymore. The file, he says. Gone, Alexei says. Or rather, everywhere. Depending on what you do next, she watches the older man process this, watches him recalculate. Expose 11 people, he says. You killed her father. Silence. That was a decision, Alexei says, made by men in this organization. Don't explain it to me. I know what it was. The older man's eyes move to her. She holds his gaze the way she held every gaze in the last 3 years, steady and unafraid and completely present. What do you want, he says, to her specifically. Like he's decided she's the one worth negotiating with, she takes a step forward. I want the names of the men who ordered my father's death, she says. Her voice is completely even. I want documentation. I want it given to the right people, not your people. Mine. She pauses, and I want him out, completely. Clean extraction. New identity if needed. Done. And if we don't, then 11 people have a very bad morning, she says. And so do the men who gave the order, because their names are in there too. She'd found that herself, 2 days ago. She hadn't told Alexei, she just added them to the copy quietly, carefully. He finds out now. She sees it in his face, the flash of recognition, the recalibration, something that might be the most genuine smile she's ever seen from him, brief and real and completely unguarded. She's thorough, he says to the older man. Not to her, to him, like he's explaining something. She's always been thorough. The older man makes a call. It takes 40 minutes. When it's done, he looks at both of them with the expression of a man who has lost something and is professional enough not to show how much. "You'll have it by Monday," he says. Then they leave. The house is very quiet after. She sits on the kitchen floor, not dramatically, just because her legs decided and the floor was there. And Alexei sits beside her, their backs against the cabinets, shoulders touching, and they don't speak for a long time. "You found their names," he says eventually. 2 weeks ago. You didn't tell me." "I needed to know I could do it myself," she says. "If I had to." He's quiet for a moment. "Could you have?" he says. If they hadn't agreed, she thinks about her father, the jazz records, Mishka. The ring she's worn on a chain for 12 years. "Yes," she says. He takes her hand. Doesn't say anything, just holds it with the simple, certain grip of a man who has decided and is done deliberating. She leans her head against his shoulder. They sit on the kitchen floor until it gets light. Chapter 7. After Monday comes, the documentation arrives as promised, a drive delivered by a man she doesn't recognize who rings the bell and leaves without speaking. She goes through it with the same methodical thoroughness she brings to everything. It's enough. More than enough. She sends it to a journalist she's been researching for 2 weeks. Someone with a track record of protecting sources and finishing what they start. She writes a single line with it. "My father's name was Victor Sorrel. He deserved better." Then she closes her laptop and makes coffee, and Alexei comes downstairs with his hair still wrong from sleep, and she thinks, This is what 3 years of mornings almost were. The weeks that follow are not clean. She wants to be honest about that. There are days she is furious. At him, at the organization, at her father for keeping secrets that got him killed, at herself for spending 3 years choosing warmth over answers. She tells Alexei when she's angry, and he takes it without defending himself and without flinching and without going anywhere. "You're still here," she says one evening. Partly a question. "I'm still here," he says. "Not a performance, just fact. I don't know your real name," she says. "Not entirely. I don't know what's real." "Alexei is real," he says. "Everything I felt is real." He looks at her. "The rest I'll spend as long as you want, building something true on top of it." She looks at him for a long moment. "That's going to take a while," she says. "I have time," he says. "If you do," she keeps the ring. Not on the chain anymore. She has it reset, the gold cleaned, the engraving filled in. She wears it on her right hand now. Not a wedding ring. Not a symbol of anything that was false. A reminder that her father loved her enough to trust her with the most important thing he had. That she was stronger than the 3 years she spent being careful. That the most dangerous thing she ever did was choose, in a kitchen at 3 a.m. with a stranger across the table, to stay. She doesn't remarry him, not because she doesn't want to, but because she thinks some things are more real without the paper, without the ceremony and the performance and the architecture of legitimacy. He is hers. She is his. In the specific private way of 2 people who chose each other past every reason not to. "What do we call this?" she asks once, late at night. His voice in the dark hours, he says. "That's not a category." "No," he agrees. "It isn't." She thinks about that. "Okay," she says. She visits her father's grave on a Tuesday in November. She brings nothing, no flowers, nothing ceremonial. Just herself in the cold with her hands in her pockets and the particular clarity she's found on the other side of everything. "I found it," she says. "Whatever you hid. I found it and I used it, and the men who I took care of it, Papa. The way you taught me to take care of things." She pauses, quietly, thoroughly, without making a scene. The wind moves through the cemetery. "He's good," she says. "The real version of him. You would have, I think you would have liked him. Eventually." She almost smiles. "After you made him very uncomfortable." She stands there for a while longer, then she goes home. Alexei is in the kitchen, coffee made. The specific morning quiet she's come to understand is his version of peace, contained, present, real. He looks up when she comes in. She sits across from him. She picks up her coffee. Outside the window, the city does what cities do, noise and motion, and 10,000 lives happening simultaneously in all the different directions lives go. Inside, she breathes. For the first time in a very long time, she doesn't count the exits. She doesn't need to. She's already home.